It was during the decade of the 1990s that the Rolling Stones proved once and for all that rock and roll has no boundaries or age limits. Having survived the fallout of the 1980s, the Rolling Stones surged through the 1990s with fresh wind in their sails and new lands in their sight.
And they said this show will never happen in Russia.
As knights of the global village, the Rolling Stones would go on to spread their influence as never before. And yet, as the world changed around them, the spirit of their music remained true.
This particular version of the Stones is probably the most interesting one yet.
Despite broken marriages, creative differences, and even the departure of Bill Wyman, nothing would deter the Stones from evolving through yet another prolific stage in their career. This is the band that knows no end. This is the Rolling Stones of the 1990s. By the time 1990 rolled in, the Stones were well on their way to pulling off the greatest tour so far in their history. The American leg of the Steel Wheels tour was a phenomenal success. With 60 dates under their belt and ticket sales through the roof, the band proved to fans and critics alike that they were back, bigger and badder than ever.
We never really set out to be the baddest. Just want to be the best at what we do. And I think that on the last, 70 shows, I think they were a pretty good standard. I think they were the highest standard Rolling Stones shows that I've ever been to. I don't know about you, you might have seen some bad days, but they were really good, and I think this tour is going to show that the Rolling Stones still can deliver.
The Stones embarked on the next leg of the tour in February of 1990, hauling their massive stage show across the Pacific to Japan.
The Stones went to Japan in 1990 for the first time. They had been prevented from going there previously because of their drug convictions, and so they couldn't get visas. But they finally went in 1990 as part of their Steel Wheels tour. And so I said, well, this is history in the making. I've got to go and see this. So I went over there, and the interesting thing is they played the Tokyo Dome for 10 straight nights, all sold out, at $70 a ticket, which, believe me, at that time was a very expensive price. But people traveled all over from Japan to come to the Tokyo Dome because that was the only venue that they played in Japan for those 10 days. The thing is literally about 72 hours before the Stones were there, Mike Tyson lost his title, his heavyweight title, for the first time. Buster Douglas knocked him to the canvas, and the Stones were all there. And so the very first thing Keith says to the fans when he comes up to sing his songs at the first concert is, "I feel better than Mike Tyson." And the fans just loved it. And Mick learned a few words of Japanese that he said to the crowd.
Watashi tachi wa Nihon ni kuru no nagaru
And the fans there just loved it.
Well, we've never seen them before, and I've been following them for about a few years since the Beatles came out. So I want to bring my boys to it, and so we could enjoy 2 generations of it.
The timing of the concerts was about 6:30 p.m. each day, so most people were coming straight from work. And so a lot of them were dressed in business suits, but a lot of them just tore off their business suits and put on bandanas and whatever and just tried to impersonate Keith. And they were just so excited to have the Stones come there, I mean, after so many years.
You know, Japanese people is very quiet and shy, so Stones are, I think they're surprised. Mick Jagger singing, dancing, but very quiet. American people very crazy and noisy, shouting and dancing, drinking, but Japanese people just watching, very quiet concert.
The one thing that was amazing about Japan, and I wonder if you'd see that anywhere else in the world, is when the concert's over, people move out like row by row, and everybody sort of sits there politely and sort of like waits their turn to leave, and they're very organized. I can't, you'd never see that in the States.
After Japan, the band made their way back to Europe, eager to perform for yet another generation of Stones fans.
We chucked out the steel wheels thing. We thought a year of that was enough. So we redesigned the stage and we're doing this urban jungle thing, which will be completely new. We're very pleased to be doing this section, the European section. You know, Britain's our home country, Europe. We're looking forward to doing. We haven't done it for a very, very long time.
The Stones launched Urban Jungle, the European leg of the tour, without missing a beat, picking up where they left off nearly 8 years before. But of all the European tours since their formation, this one seemed to have a greater meaning.
The wall was crumbling. The sledgehammers in the hands of men not born when it went up.
A new era had dawned. At long last, the Iron Curtain was lifting. And when the Stones played West Berlin in June of 1990, one of the most imposing symbols of oppression in modern history was literally being knocked down before them.
I remember, you know, the wall basically was still there. It was coming down. It fit for the Rolling Stones to be there.
We were there, I think, maybe a week and a half after the curtain had lifted, and it was wild.
We never thought we'd see the fall of the Berlin Wall back before it happened. And then we played in the Olympic Stadium in Berlin on the west side, where Hitler had given his speeches, and it had all this horrible dark energy to it, but in a way it was sort of a rebirth, and a new political aura was coming in, and the freedom that was coming in and with the fall of communism.
One of the first letters I wrote to my wife was about being in Berlin and seeing, you know, the Russian bases there, you know. It was dark, cold, and gray.
They come from fairly tough backgrounds themselves, I think, you know what I mean, and have a real appreciation, as successful as they are, of these kinds of things. You know, I know Keith will talk about, I remember about his memories of the war.
I've talked to Keith about historic things a number of times, and Mick too. I think they were both deeply shaped by being babies born during World War II, when the bombs were still dropping on London. And I got a sense from both of them that they have a very deep awareness of history, and they knew very deeply what was going on as the Soviet Union was falling apart. Obviously, this was a major historic event.
They actually chartered a train through what was Eastern Germany, and we could just see how that part of that country had been decimated. And I felt that they really wanted to go there, not in any exploitative way, but to really, you know, experience it and impact, you know, interact.
The band's first tour dates behind the Iron Curtain were actually in 1967, when the Stones played in Warsaw, Poland. 2 decades would pass before the Stones could return to the Eastern Bloc to perform. This time around, there would be no water cannons or tear gas to subdue rowdy fans. With much anticipation, the Rolling Stones played for the first time in East Berlin to a capacity crowd. It was indeed a brave new world. As political reforms swept through Europe, so did the Stones. When they arrived in Czechoslovakia, they found the 40-year-old communist regime gone, replaced by a more democratic government. Awaiting their arrival, the nation's president himself, writer, poet Václav Havel.
I went with them, you know, to meet Havel, which is really cool. I went to the castle with the band, and that was a thrill, and stepping out on the balcony and the sea of people, and they're enjoying, you know, their new freedom.
Yeah, I remember he came to the hotel and we were there, and he was like a huge, you know, he's a rock and roll fan.
Havel and some of his ministers in the government came down to the show, and they had all been dissidents in Czechoslovakia.
The tanks roll out and the Stones roll in. I still got that poster. It was heavy, man. Heavy.
Tanks are rolling out, Stones are rolling in, and so there was this sort of this added significance and symbolism to the simple fact that the Stones were putting on this show, and where there'd been this huge portrait of Stalin. They had the Stones Yaya logo pasted over, which was sort of said it all, I guess.
I mean, talk about music transcending politics.
That place we played in Prague was like, held 120,000 people. It was by far the biggest place I'd ever seen, you know, and it was packed. And I think a lot of tickets were free, you know. They gave away a lot of tickets because people couldn't afford them.
The people were just nice, you know. I think I even got some tickets and gave them away, bought some tickets and gave them away because, you know, they couldn't afford it. But that felt good, you know, to be able to bring, you know, a smile to somebody's face that had been, you know, thumbed, you know, for most of their life.
So the air was just electric, and you could just feel this unbelievable excitement.
It was like these people had never seen anything like it. And it was like they were so in awe and so just blown away by the technology they were seeing. I mean, it was the first time they'd seen, like, probably, I think there's laser lights going on and things like that. And this was like a real cultural shock for them in a way, I think. And they were just in awe coming out of the shackles of communism, all of a sudden seeing this freedom, and what better expression of freedom than rock and roll.
The band reportedly donated their entire fee for the show to a children's charity run by President Havel's wife. To cap off the tour, the band played 2 sold-out nights in London. After 115 shows across 3 continents, the Steel Wheels Urban Jungle Tour grossed a reported $200 million, an astounding achievement.
My impression going into the Steel Wheels tour was that the band wasn't sure that they would sell out, that, you know, that people would really, you know, want to see them in that kind of huge way. And, you know, by the end of 117 shows, clearly it was the biggest tour of all time.
Now deserving some serious time off, the band parted ways. While traveling through Indonesia, Mick and Jerry Hall finally sealed their 10-year romance in matrimony. Meanwhile, the Stones were ready to release Flashpoint, a collection of live songs recorded during their recent world tour. The album also featured High Wire, a studio track commenting on the situation in the Persian Gulf. The song was actually recorded as bombs dropped on Baghdad. When asked about the lyrics, Mick responded, "It's not about the Persian Gulf War, it's about how it started." Keith was quoted as saying, "It's about how you build up some shaky dictator by selling him arms. You can't build them up, because then you've got to slam them down." The sessions for High Wire would be the last for Bill Wyman as a Rolling Stone. When the Stones signed a 3-year album deal worth a reported $45 million, Bill Wyman opted not to sign the contract. For Bill, there were more pressing matters to attend to, namely his disgruntled young wife.
In the High Court, Mr. Justice Thorpe heard 7 days of submissions about their marriage. Mandy Smith struggling with her wasting illness to give evidence, Bill Wyman cheerful throughout. Today, their lawyers agreed a settlement, an amicable agreement over the terms.
With a restaurant to manage and his divorce from Mandy final, Bill officially quit the Rolling Stones in January of 1993.
I had enough of that, you know. I did it 31 years. It was wonderful. I had great times, still great mates with the band and all that, but it's not the sort of music I'm interested in anymore.
Especially in a band like the Stones, without like 100% commitment to it, you're dragging everybody else. And Bill, in that respect, I can look at it and say, well, you probably felt that way as well, and in a way, let's say you bowed out gracefully.
In 1993, the Glimmer Twins celebrated their 50th birthdays, and each produced impressive solo work. Mick, now a grandfather, enlisted young rocker Lenny Kravitz and veteran keyboardist Billy Preston for his 3rd solo album, Wandering Spirit. It was considered his best to date and reached number 11 in the States.
I think it was good practice for them to get a chance to do their own individual things, solo projects. I think that's what the Beatles also wanted to do. You know, for years they probably wanted to do it. because after being with a group so long, you know, you kind of get hemmed into the same thing all the time. You know what to expect. And when you write songs on your own, and you probably want to do it, you want to get a chance to get that out of you. So I think that's a good thing.
Also that year, Keith released his second solo album, Main Offender, and took the expensive winos back on the road for a world tour.
Main Offender, that was the second winos thing with Keith. I could see that Keith was inspired. He was strongly inspired. I mean, Keith he's a songwriter. He's a song man, you know? He told me that they were gonna get together and do another record. He was gonna try to pull me in on some of it, and he did.
Fueled by the energy and success of their respective solo projects, the old mates found the creative fire still burning between them and made plans to begin work on a new Stones album.
Voodoo Lounge was really special to me because I was there when a lot of the songs were just being put together. It starts with a bunch of great ideas, and they work it until it forms. You know, nothing's written in stone. I actually got to see it from the ground up, and got to participate on the ground floor. So that's pretty special.
With producer Don Was behind the controls, the Voodoo Lounge album started to take shape in July of 1993. But there was one thing missing: a bass player.
Bass and drums is a tight knit, you know, and to find the right guy. We were really, as usual with the Stones, just at the right moment, the right man appears.
In stepped Chicago native Darryl Jones, a veteran bassist who had played with the likes of Peter Gabriel, Eric Clapton, Madonna, and the late Miles Davis.
The bass is very important in their music, you know, in that stuff. And Darryl just fit. He just fit. Darryl was a bass player that, you know, the guys play with Miles, you know what I'm saying? He was a true musician.
Darryl came in and kicked much booty. Much booty. Not to take anything away from Bill Wyman, but I'm telling you, man, the way Darryl works with Charlie, my God, what a foundation.
The Voodoo Lounge album came to fruition in the fall of 1993. The Stones proved they still had the creative power to turn out a great rock and roll album.
What I like about this Voodoo Lounge album is, before my time, when they were making albums like Exile and Let It Bleed and all them kind of good ones, we seem to have more of that Stonesy ingredient there, you know.
As a fan and as someone who got the opportunity to actually participate in that record, I mean, I'm sure they were happy with it. I mean, I was thrilled with it, you know.
With a new record in the stores, it was time to hit the road for another world tour. Determined to outdo the last one, the Stones assembled a stage show that would push the envelope of live entertainment even further. It required a 259-person road crew, a fleet of 56 maximum semi-trailers, 9 custom-fitted buses, a specially refitted Boeing 727, 3,810,000 watts of generated power, 8 miles of power cables, 1,500 lights, a 1.5 million watt sound system, and the world's largest mobile jumbotron.
If you're going to do stadiums, you're going to put on a really, you know, big show, something to look at and remember, and something to keep your interest. That's where, but on the other hand, you don't want to overwhelm the music.
The Voodoo Lounge Tour officially kicked off in August of 1994 at RFK Stadium in Washington, D.C. In a flash of white light and raw power, the Stones were back in the saddle. The support ensemble was smaller than the previous tour, consisting of Chuck Leavell on keyboard, Bernard Fowler and Lisa Fischer on vocals, the new West Horns and Bobby Keys manning the brass section, and of course, the new kid in town, Darryl Jones on bass.
This particular version of the Stones is probably the most interesting one yet.
When I look at Keith, I look at him. He's having so much fun, and Ronnie and Mick too, and really, it just feels comfortable to me. It's beginning to really feel comfortable.
Although all seemed well, bad news would take the band by surprise. While in Boston, the Stones learned that Nicky Hopkins, their pianist from 1966 through 1974, had died of Crohn's disease. He was 50 years of age. Later that month, Jimmy Miller, the sonic genius who produced the string of records from Beggar's Banquet to It's Only Rock and Roll, also died. The cause of death, liver failure. He was 52.
So have you felt the tour's gone? You're kind of halfway through. I mean, has it lived up to expectations? Has it been a rocking one?
Yeah, but more than anybody expected. And the band's still, the band is getting better and better. The guys are knocking me out, and that makes me happy. And if I'm happy, it keeps everybody else happy, because when I'm unhappy, forget about it.
When the Voodoo Lounge tour ended in North America, it had grossed over $120 million, becoming the top-grossing North American tour of the 20th century. And to go where they had never gone before, the Stones migrated south for dates in Mexico, Brazil, Chile, and Argentina.
Always going to go to South America on every tour. We never actually got there. So it always falls to pieces.
When I started...
Sí, el público que él ve, bueno, los fans que ve fuera del hotel le recuerdan la década del 60.
Okay, she wants to know if for you, Keith, the fans that you see outside of the hotel remind you at all of the fans of the 70s?
Well, except they're bigger and stronger. It used to be young girls, exclusively, and now it's guys.
En aquella época eran mujeres, ahora son muchachos.
Argentina was a bit scary because, they're just such passionate people. On the ride from the airport all the way into downtown Buenos Aires, there are people standing along the highway all the way. This was just like, the films, from the 60s, and the girls are screaming, and we pull up, and they're on top of the van, just surrounded, pounding the van. And then they're singing outside the hotel all night. Okay, it gets a little quiet. First thing in the morning, they're outside the hotel singing, and singing loud and strong. It was amazing.
It was really interesting for us to go there to see, what had happened, because we've been to South America a lot before and never actually worked there. And the power of the church is still quite strong in some of these countries. But I think generally they all took it with a sort of humour, because otherwise we would never have made it to Chile, where there's still a lot of censorship and so on, and you can't buy books that and all that sort of thing. So, there's still a few extremist views in these countries, but mostly they think they've taken things with much more humour, which is a lot of times what was lacking before.
The Voodoo Lounge tour led the Stones not only to South America for the first time, but South Africa as well.
We made it, brothers, we made it. I remember we were flying in, and I could see the tip of Africa. And every book, every picture, every slave story, every story that I ever heard from my mother, my grandmother, apartheid, just everything was flashing like I was seeing all this shit, and I just burst out in tears, Yeah, I got to see home for the first time.
South Africa, a country undergoing historic change. In fact, it was only a few years before that apartheid still plagued the land. In 1985, Keith worked on the anti-apartheid album Sun City, which helped open the public's eye to the harsh reality facing South African blacks. 10 years later, the Stones played to a non-segregated stadium. Long-awaited dreams were coming true, and for the Stones, the world was becoming a smaller place.
We came all the way from Zimbabwe to come and see the Rolling Stones.
The Stones, when I can roll them, they're excellent, you know, but when I watch them, they're like,
Brother, the Rolling Stones, the greatest band in the world! What do you remember? The greatest band in the world!
From one continent to the next, from one culture to another, the Stones blazed through Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. And after 9 months on the road, the band took a month off before taking on Europe.
£45,000.
While gearing up for the European leg of the tour, an amazing discovery took place in an attic in Dartford, England, the town where Keith and Mick were raised. A 13-song tape of Little Boy and the Blue Boys, the pre-Stones band comprised of Mick, Keith and old mate Dick Taylor, was found.
Well, this is the earliest known recording of Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. It predates the Stones. And the fascinating thing is that it's immediately recognisable as being Mick Jagger's voice and Keith Richards' guitar playing that became the sound of the Stones.
So Alexis Corner asked us if we could make him a tape. And so we made a tape and we thought, what are we going to call ourselves? And we were Little Boy Blue and the Blue Boys. Was the name we wrote on the tape. And of course that was a short-lived name and a short-lived line-up in a way, because after that we met Brian and we sort of amalgamated with what Brian was doing, and so Little Boy Blue went into the mists of time, I'm afraid.
The Blast from the Past was recorded in 1961 and sold at an auction to an anonymous buyer for £45,000. It turned out the new owner was none other than Mick Jagger himself.
He's back in black for the Stones Voodoo Lounge World Tour.
The Voodoo Lounge Tour resumed in June of '95, but not before the Stones played 2 unexpected gigs at the Paradiso Club in Amsterdam. It was a drastic change going from a stadium-oriented show to an intimate setting for 800 people. The Stones performed magnificently, with a few surprises to boot. Shine a Light was played for the first time in public, as was Bob Dylan's Like a Rolling Stone, a song the band was destined to perform at some point in time. The shows were recorded and released the following year in a CD appropriately titled Stripped.
We hadn't played a lot of shows that size. And I don't know, I like those shows. I do like those shows, you know, to be, you know, a little closer, you know, to the people, and they're just going mad, you know. It's a lot of fun.
Looking good, Amsterdam.
The Dutch are the best fans. There's no doubt about it. You go to a Dutch show, you've got fans there. In America, you've got seating. It's impossible. I mean, unless you've got money, you don't get to the front. Unless you're willing to struggle with the bounces and stuff and get thrown back every 5 minutes, but keep going, keep going, keep going. You can do that. I mean, I've done that. The European show, the fans are at the front. It's open seating. There's nothing. A ticket is like 50, 60 bucks. We're not talking $750 here. Everybody pays the same price. If you were a fan, you want to see the band, you go the night before, sleep outside. I've done that many times, even in rain. It doesn't matter. I'll do it.
Welcome in the Voodoo Lounge.
The Stones toured Europe through the summer of '95, deploying both their massive stadium show as well as the stripped-down club set. In Belgium, the Stones performed for the first time in 18 years.
After coming from places I haven't played before, it's even more intensified the feeling like, oh, you know, I'm back amongst the bunch, you know. So you give me a postage stamp, I'll play it, you know. You know, you want to give me, you know, Wembley Stadium, I'd play that too, you know. I mean, I can do it now, you know, but it's taken me 30 years to figure it out, I think, you know what I mean?
Thank you and welcome, Wembley, to the Voodoo Lounge.
At Wembley Stadium, Bill Wyman showed up to watch his old bandmates do their thing. It marked the first occasion since before he joined the band in 1963 that he watched the Rolling Stones from the audience.
You're always ready to write them off until you see them, and then you think, well, they're going to carry on for ages, you know.
Mick Jagger's energy on those.
Mick Jagger's energy was amazing, actually, on this one more than any other. I think, yeah, real good.
I was remembering it wasn't so long back that people were saying that when you first came on the scene, you were very like Mick Jagger. Does that annoy you when they said it?
No, flattering. If I was singing as well as he did tonight, it's great flattering.
After performing 126 shows for 8 million people and grossing $500 million, the Stones wrapped up their biggest tour to date in grand style. Once again, they proved that you're never too old to rock and roll. The Stones spent much of 1996 apart. Keith worked on another solo project called The Wingless Angels, a soulful meditation rooted in traditional reggae. Mick spent much of his time setting up Jagged Films, his movie production company, while enjoying the Hollywood nightlife. Charlie Watts made his 4th album and brought in Bernard Fowler for vocals on a list of jazz standards.
I got a chance to sing jazz standards for the first time, thanks to Charlie Watts. And it was one of the best musical experiences of my life.
That year, Alan Klein released the Rock and Roll Circus on video and CD. Filmed in 1968, the film showcased many of rock's finest, some of whom showed up nearly 30 years later to revel in the nostalgia. Why so long a delay? The Stones thought their performance was not up to par. Nevertheless, music fans were delighted to finally have a chance to see and hear this historic film as it was intended to be seen.
We now see it a generation after we made it, and that at least 5 people in the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus are dead. John Lennon, Brian Jones, Keith Moon, a woman called Daniela Luna, Nicky Hopkins, who played piano with the Stones. Seeing it now, I just think it does give it a kind of poignant feel.
As usual, the band's time spent away from one another was short-lived, and by the end of 1996, plans for a new album were on the table. To get things rolling in a new direction, Mick called on the fresh talents of LA producers Mike Simpson and John King, better known as the Dust Brothers.
Mick set up the meeting. We flew to New York and met him at his hotel. And he said, listen, I've listened to the stuff that you guys have worked on, and I really like what you do, and you guys definitely have a good sense of what the groove is all about. And he said, and we have these songs that I think would be right up your alley. And he played us these songs, and we were blown away. I mean, the demos sounded like we had actually worked on them already, and it had sort of that Dust Brothers flavor to them, just really funky beats and great bass lines and really cool grooves.
Mick is an extremely intelligent person and very aware of what's going on in music, and so it was kind of a natural match. It's almost like which of these two pictures go together.
Mick is that. He's always got his ear on the track. He knows what's happening, you know. Whereas I think it was, a lot of the other guys, they, if what new stuff they hear, they just happen to hear. But I think Mick actually goes out and seeks it.
Well, they could care less about repeating things they've already done. I mean, that's, you know that, or they'll say that to you straight up, right when you first meet them. Yeah. It's like they don't care. That doesn't even seem like a good idea at all to them to revisit past achievements.
In fact, when we met with Mick the first time, he referenced a couple of older Stones songs, and I said, I got to tell you, I'm a fan of your music, but I'm not like a crazy diehard fan, and I'm not familiar with all of your records. And Mick was like, oh, I'm so glad to hear that. You don't know how many engineers and producers I meet with who are telling me it should sound just like, just like this or just like that. And he's like, I'm really glad, that's the reason that we're reaching out, is because we want sort of a fresh approach and someone who's not so stuck in what we used to do.
It's almost like experimenting, some songs were like this, different people coming in. I mean, Don Ross was an overall, producer, but there was a lot of different, like engineer producers were involved.
A lot of that record was farmed out to different camps, and then they realized in the end they had to conform. But the Dust Brothers were definitely their own entity. Babyface was his own entity.
Mick was coming over and hanging out, sitting on like my grandma's couch that I just, brought back from Florida that was like tattered, and a real bachelor pad that we had up there, and working in this tiny home studio, which is where we've done a lot of our great work. And it was an incredible production, actually, because they had different producers in, and Don and the Glimmer Twins are kind of executive and producing the whole thing with these other people under them. At any point, there's like three, besides those guys, there's like 2 or 3 top producers in the building over at Ocean Way. There's like maybe, 3 or 4 top engineers. Obviously, their years spent in the studio have educated them on how to do things in a really productive and efficient and like way that you can get great music done. I mean, they have a lot of friends. They're fantastic musicians, singers, and they're all hanging out. I mean, it's like a party when the Stones are recording.
Yeah, I did work with them on Bridges to Babylon. And they move into a studio, and they take their time and they work on the song for days and days until they get it right. And that's the way they work.
There was mixes going on in 5 rooms in LA. 5 different mix engineers, 5 $1,800 a day studios and up at all times.
You're there for one purpose, to do an album. So, and the studio's available at all times. You can go in whenever you want to. You can stop when you want to. We have dinner there. So we camp out, in the studio.
You get caught in the flow of doing something, and it's so good, and then it takes you. And even if you're tired, it'll push you, and all of a sudden you realize, shit, it's 12 o'clock. Been here 24 hours.
I have a lot of respect for a guy like Keith Richards, who would pull up a 2-inch tape box, 2 inches high, lay it down right beside his ashtray while working, and just, get a half an hour sleep, 45 minutes sleep right there in the control room. Wake right up, get a drink, sit down, continue the session as if it never had stopped. That's the level you're dealing with here.
Don Watts' intentions when we started Bridges to Babylon was to have Mick and Keith work separately and then to kind of bring them together at some point. Now, the idea of there being this 2 camps, like working on the record, the Keith camp and the Mick camp, creates a bigger can of worms. And, everybody knows that cans of worms are no fun to start with. 1 worm is enough, but none are better.
I wasn't too sure at first when I was hearing, different names brought up, that they would be working with. My initial thought was that maybe it would go too far, but it all worked out in the end,
However they get to the end product is always okay. Whether they start out together or separately, the end result is really the main thing, and they all end up participating in some kind of way on it. But I think it's good, whether they work together or not. I mean, because it's their music, I mean, if Keith wrote it, it's still Stones,
The Rolling Stones on the move again. To set up their world tour launch, the veteran rockers had part of New York's Brooklyn Bridge to themselves. And perhaps appropriately, their car, a Cadillac, was a 50s model. It's not surprising, therefore, that the Bridges to Babylon tour will begin here with a concert in Chicago next month. Preempting an obvious question, Mick Jagger poked fun at journalists during today's news conference.
Is this going to be your last tour? Yeah, this and the next 5. Thank you.
As a warm-up gig, the Stones played to a small crowd of lucky fans at a club called the Double Door in Chicago.
They came They came and played this show, and they, you know, had no props and no staging and no nothing, and they just played, and that was where, you know, that's where they come from. So it's always really fun seeing them in that setting. Plus, you see the facial expressions that are going on because it's early in the game, and they're looking at each other. It's not everybody's so sure of themselves yet, you know, and there's a lot of interaction that way, and that's magic. A lot of great things come out of that.
On a much larger scale, Chicago's Soldier Field would play host to the first official show for the Bridges to Babylon tour.
We came to rock for everybody like this.
The band was the same as the Voodoo Lounge tour, with the addition of South African native Blondie Chaplin on backing vocals and percussion.
It's whenever you do something new, you can do rehearsals and try and, you know, get comfortable with that, but there's nothing like going in 80,000 people and you're working with these guys you like and you're nervous as crap and you don't sleep the night before. So yeah, it was pretty intense.
The songs that were basically written and worked up in the studio kind of fleshed themselves out and became better live than they were, and especially not as much with the ones that I did with Keith where he sang and we kind of played them as a band and worked them like that, but the other ones that were more kind of built and assembled, those songs benefited greatly from being played live and from just them feeling them out and getting them to the point where the songs really developed into their potential, if you will.
For the Stones, been there, done that is a maxim hard to break. With over 35 years of rock and roll under their belts and countless world tours, it's not easy keeping it fresh and new. So when the Stones finally arrived in Russia to perform there for the first time, excitement was in the air.
And they thought this show was so awful and so decadent, and they said this show will never happen in Russia. So then we tried again in the 70s when Madame Furtsova was in charge, and she said, no.
Imagine in the 60s or 70s when you get a little radio blast of a song that you dig and then the man come and hit you. You know, just because you want to hear it. Vodka, the Kremlin, late night. Some things I can't share. Some things I won't share. But it was a good time had by all, I'm sure. An experience. I never thought I'd ever see Russia. So they like, you know, playing to fans wherever they are. So, you know, Russia with the whole, you know, what Russia, we think Russia is or was or will be, whatever. It's still fascinating to want to go somewhere like that and play. I'd been there one time before. So I was the only one that had been there before, so I got a kick out of looking at them, get a kick out of where they are. I mean, because you got to be numb to not feel something when you go to places like that, or whether it's China, whether it's this, or whatever, you know what I mean? So it's something new and completely foreign that's, you know, is stimulating at the same time, right?
It was here inside this stadium that years of anticipation finally came to an end, and the Rolling Stones could play to their many Russian fans. Fans paid up to £500. The average monthly wage here is a fifth of that. The band insisted cheaper tickets went on sale, but at the back there were empty seats. This trip was also for sightseeing. In Red Square, they were besieged by fans who could at least afford to ask for an autograph.
Thank you very much, you guys.
Last night, the long wait was forgotten as the band gave one of their best ever shows. This fan called it amazing. Another said he'd waited 10 years for the show. His idols say they'll be back soon. Now every music store in this city says they're out of the band's CDs. The Rolling Stones may have been too much for the old communist regime, but today's very different Russia loves them.
The Bridges to Babylon tour ended with a show in Turkey. They had played 107 shows to 4.75 million fans, grossing almost $300 million. They released a live album called No Security to showcase just how good the tour was. In fact, it was so good, the Stones decided to stay on the road and do a string of stripped-down arena shows in the States. They called it the No Security Tour and planned for another 36 dates, kicking off in January of 1999.
Yeah, that was pretty heavy. I mean, that's like 2 tours almost. I mean, the No Security was smaller. I mean, it wasn't as long.
But before the No Security Tour would roll, Mick Jagger would find himself between a rock and a hard place.
They've been together for more than 20 years. Mick Jagger and Jerry Hall, seen here with daughter Elizabeth, made one of the most glamorous couples in show business. But now the partnership is over. This Brazilian model is said to be the last straw straining Jerry's tolerance of Mick's roving eye. 29-year-old Luciana Morad claims the baby she's expecting is Jagger's. She keeps a flat in London's smart Chelsea district. In an attempt to patch things up with Jerry, Mick is said to have spent £10,000 on designer clothes at this shop for her at Christmas. It failed. Jerry's lawyers have confirmed they've initiated divorce proceedings on her behalf. Mick's assets amount to an estimated £145 million, including classic cars, stocks and shares, record royalties and properties around the world. In London, his mansion in Richmond is reportedly worth around £3 million, as is his West London home in Kensington. His estate on the Caribbean island of Mustique is worth around £8 million. His house in New York is worth £3 million, and his French chateau an estimated £1 million. But legal experts say there's a query over the legitimacy of the couple's marriage in Bali.
It's been rumoured for some time that the Hindu ceremony in Indonesia that they went through, the form of marriage ceremony, was in fact not valid locally. And of course, if it's not valid in Indonesia, then of course it won't be valid and recognised by the courts in this country. And that means that Jerry would then have to file for a decree of nullity.
Mick Jagger's first marriage to Bianca ended in divorce, costing him £500,000. Now his split from Jerry will cost him far more. The arrangements for their 4 children and their family home are tonight under review.
Jerry knew who he was before she married him. It is pretty low that now he claims that they weren't married, which just seems like in there she could sue him for, misleading or something. But I guess that's what rock and roll is all about.
With Mick's divorce in motion, the No Security Tour blew through the States with gale force for another round of rock'em sock'em performances. And yet, they were now grandfathers, pushing 60, with no signs of slowing down.
It must be a burning sensation to want to succeed and play good and love music. Otherwise, what the hell? They could stay home.
It is the best of British rock on the grandest scale. The Rolling Stones, flamboyant as ever, back on a UK stage for the first time since 1995. Some of the 40,000 fans at Murrayfield probably weren't born when the Stones formed, but all were eager to see the band who cancelled British dates last year because of new tax rules.
They're the best band in the world, really.
They are a great band.
Fantastic.
Great band. 30, 40 years, they're still rocking and rolling. We love them.
To make up for a number of postponed shows in Europe, the Stones finished off what was for the most part a 2-year road trip.
When the tour is over, you hate it's over, you miss people, but then you get on with your lives and, it kind of goes away, and then, you get the call 4 or 3 years later, and it's like, damn, I miss these guys. I miss this guy. I miss that guy.
As the 90s came to a close, the Stones found themselves entering yet another decade. In fact, a new millennium. And to think, they almost called it quits back in the 1980s. As for the 90s, it was by all means an incredibly prolific period for the bad boys of rock and roll.
Almost every critic in the world repeats the mantra, the Rolling Stones haven't done anything in 20 years worth listening to. They're totally irrelevant. They haven't, And I'm looking at this work and thinking, are we living in the same world, or are you paid by someone to say this nonsense? There's an enormous amount of terrifically good work there. And to make it simple, if you just listen to Keith Richards' songs, the songs he sings on Voodoo Lounge and on Bridges to Babylon. He sings 2 on Voodoo Lounge and 3 on Bridges to Babylon. And you just listen to those songs alone, you see an enormous growth as a songwriter. I mean, he's writing in different forms he's ever written before. He's writing a different type of song than he's written before. His voice is much stronger, he's much more confident. The last 6 minutes to Bridges to Babylon, which are 2 songs by Keith tied together by the producer into one piece of seamless music, is an absolutely stunningly beautiful piece of music.
As the world prepared to usher in a new millennium, Stones fans couldn't help but wonder if the band would return to the limelight once again. Had the last time come and gone? Or would the Rolling Stones carry on into yet another decade? With their 40th anniversary on the horizon, why quit now? After all, it's only rock and roll.